Good morning, councilors. I'd like to call to order the Metro Council Business Meeting of December 5th, 2024. Georgia, will you please call the roll for attendance?
Yes. Councillor Simpson?
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Lewis?
Present.
Councillor Rosenthal?
Present. Good morning.
Councillor Gonzalez?
Morning. Here.
Councillor Nolan?
Good morning.
Good.
I'm here too.
Good morning. And Councillor Wong will be here shortly, and Council President Peterson.
Here. Thank you so much. Georgia, can we please play this safety video for our in-person attendees?
Hi, I'm Justin Dunlap, and I'm the department head stagehand electrician at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. Safety is a big part of my job. From electrical, making sure that I stay up to date on the NFPA codes and regulations, to rigging, where we make sure that everything is safely suspended overhead, to egress, ensuring that our audiences, performers, and technicians have the safest possible route in case of emergency. I'm out here at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and you're in the Metro Regional Center. Please note that we're on the 3rd floor of the building. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the steps to the 2nd floor and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk. We will meet in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue.
Council President Peterson, you are on mute.
I appreciate that. Just give me 2 seconds. We will move into our public communications and non-agenda items. Georgia, will you please describe to the audience our procedures for the public communication portion of the meeting?
Yes. If anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. I will manage a timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you have not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. If you are joining us on Zoom, you can sign up to testify by raising your hand on Zoom. Depending on your version of Zoom, the raise hand function has its own tab or is located within the reactions tab. Those calling in can raise their hands by dialing *9. If you are joining us in person, you can sign up by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bringing it up to me. For those joining us on Zoom, I will promote you to a full panelist when it is your turn to testify. I will call on your name or phone number when it is your turn to testify, and a window will appear asking you to accept being promoted to a panelist. Once you click accept, your Zoom window will close for just a brief moment before you rejoin as a panelist, where you will be able to turn on your camera if you like. As a reminder, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please introduce yourself for the record before testifying. And Council President Peterson, we do have one person who has signed up to testify, and it is Art Llewellyn. You can come up and your time will begin when you start speaking. Okay.
Good morning, Council.
Morning.
I'd like you all to bear with me this 3 minutes that I have just my comments I have to say today. I want to start by asking if any of you read my essay that I submitted to the Council twice now. Did any of you read it? No.
Skimmed it.
It's called The Walking Communities of 2040. It's a 3-part essay. Talks about the future. Talks about lousy buses that do not convert to electric vehicles very well at all, neither all battery nor hydrogen fuel cell. But you don't want to listen to me, and I've pretty much given up on this agency as credible, as concerned about the public good. I think your only constituents are the members of the Portland Business Alliance Chamber cabal, most powerful of which are automobile-related business interests, and the Portland Prosperity for the Already Prosperous Development Commission, who builds car-dependent housing. I'm feared for our future, your children's, your grandchildren's, the next generation's future. I don't have an anarchist bone in my body. I come to rallies and demonstrations not to protest what we shouldn't do, but to propose what we should do instead. I take my work to this agency and you refuse to hear me out. So, I am opponent of the Rose Quarter death trap. You can call it an improvement. I call it a death trap. It is inherently unsafe. Oh, yeah. I oppose the Southwest Quarter Max extension to Tiger and Tualatin. I'm a big supporter of light rail, but it's not the wrong for the quarter. I told it to you, who cares? Not you, not this agency. I oppose the current design for the I-5 Rose Columbia River Crossing Interstate 5 Bridge project as proposed. It has inherent flaws. Do you care? I don't think so.
1 minute.
I've been critical before in times that I come in. I've also been supportive. Today, I'm here to conduct an informal citizen's arrest. Metro Council Presiding Officer Lynn Peterson, you are under arrest. You are putting the public in harm's way, and you should be indicted to face criminal charges that culminate in negligent homicide. Your co-defendants are ODOT Director Chris Strickler and the City of Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler. Negligent homicide, knowingly putting the public in harm's way, and you're sitting there and going, "Who? I don't get it. What's wrong with it? Let's go for it." And you got all your fans out here willing to shovel money out there for development. Well, you mislead the public. And I'm sorry I have to be angry about it, but I am accusing the council president of
Art,
many crimes
Art,
worse than negligent homicide or just as bad.
Art,
So you
this
can
is Council
ignore-
President Peterson. I'm asking you, thank you so much for your
Ah,
testimony.
sure, Miss Peterson. Go to jail, Miss Peterson.
All right, not seeing any other hands or anyone in the audience. Yeah, I think we can close the public hearing.
Okay, seeing no hands raised online and no one coming forward in the audience, I will close the testimony on non-agenda items and we will move on to our first presentation. We will have a presentation today on the Regional Supportive Housing Services and Affordable Housing Funding, Governance and Accountability. Council, I appreciate your patience while I do this presentation virtually and your patience also. There's a lot to go through here and a lot that we've heard in negotiations. So I want to make sure that we are all on the same page as we move through this. But our first policy topic today, we will revisit our ongoing discussion about the future funding for affordable housing and regional supportive housing services. Actually, it's about the governance. Last week, we provided feedback to staff about how we can allocate future revenues to support a regional system that improves service delivery for our most vulnerable residents and that provides funds for much needed affordable housing investments to support those existing homelessness or at risk of becoming homelessness. Pairing housing with supporting services is the best tool we have to help abate the crisis that affects so many in this region. As I mentioned last Tuesday, the proposals and scenarios that underpin these council discussions are informed by efforts going back almost a year to engage a variety of stakeholders in our community, including organizations and local governments. Piggybacking on our most recent discussion, we will turn today to the issue of governance and accountability in distributing these funds and improving the regional system. The proposal that we have discussed has been influenced by and advances the principles for an integrated and expanded regional supportive housing and affordable housing program that this council adopted by resolution on October 17th. As with previous discussions on this topic, we will have live note-taking during our discussion, and I'm eager to hear your reactions to the proposed governance approach and its ability to support meaningful investments to address homelessness through services and housing, improve accountability, and ensure flexibility over the life of the program. So if we could start with the second slide, that would be great. Thanks. So counselors, let's remember that SHS was a wholly unprecedented program set up in a moment of crisis, creating a wholly new services program from scratch. Let's also recall that we started this funding conversation last year with clear values of making sure we did not lose steam on meeting the urgency of affordable housing and homelessness needs, and doing all we could to protect the stability and successes of the existing efforts. Expanding SHS allowable uses is our best path to avoiding an affordable housing funding gap. And extending the SHS sunset now just makes sense to avoid the risk of losing all funding for both services and housing, and thus abandoning the people who depend on it within a few years. We have heard very clearly from our key partners and in public opinion research, there is no path to extend SHS without addressing the accountability and governance challenges that have emerged during implementation so far, and better equipping this program for the long term. We've also heard this from people who are right now dedicating their time to oversee and improve the current system. That includes the lack of teeth and overlapping timelines that the SHS Oversight Committee has brought up, the inability to finalize basic aspects of regional program like a data sharing agreement, the recent comments of the TCPB co-chair Steve Rudman before council regarding the lack of authority of TCPB to see its plans and recommendations fully implemented. All this hinders our ability to deliver what voters want to see across the region and to learn as we go about how to do this work better to meet needs. Governance is the linchpin that ensures our allocations, allowable uses, and impacts are aligning with what is actually working and was actually needed now and into the future. This moment, we can reestablish the intention to make housing and homelessness an issue that we tackle effectively as a region, just as we do other key issues, with clear principles to guide us. As Angela Martin of Here Together said in a recent email to members and supporters, we aren't choosing between maintaining the current system and reforming it. We must choose between securing the program's future through collaboration or allowing it to fail under the weight of voter dissatisfaction and organized opposition. The Metro Council has decidedly taken the decision to secure the future with better outcomes for everyone by having these tough discussions. I know that we are moving in the right direction by tackling the tough issues and creating a learning culture. The purpose of this work is clearly to help people in distress or keeping them out of distress so they can move into situations where they are safe and healthy and have the skills to be able to take care of themselves and their families for the future. You will hear me say in any room I am in lately that the pressure to solve this issue on everyone involved has made for a very tough partnership with other organizations and agencies. This work here today is not to point fingers, but rather to acknowledge the challenges and identify solutions. This should be about repair and restoration of trust between all of us and the public, that we have identified those challenges and are ready to bridge to a new way of doing business because the old way is clearly not meeting expectations. And the bridge can only be built on listening. And that is what we have done, all of us, over the last year. Next slide. In any proposal we are putting to voters, we need to be crystal clear about the goals we are trying to achieve and how they connect to what we're putting on the table. There is obviously a high level of detail that will be operationalized in a new governance and oversight system. Not everything must be written in stone in the next month. However, resolution number 24-5436, which we passed on October 17th, states clearly many of our desires. It established clear principles for what we want to see in a regional system. There will be time to transition and work out details, but the point of today's conversation is to walk through the primary goals of the proposed new Housing and Homelessness Policy Advisory Committee structure, or what I've been calling H2PAC, and discuss how we ensure those goals are met. Based on everything we've heard from partners, stakeholders, and the public, what we've adopted in the resolution, I'd argue that we've established 4 primary areas for this new structure. The first is regionalism. This is the heart of the evolved program, delivering on the original goal of a truly regional response to homelessness, a single North Star goal built on local plans and know-how, but serving people whose lives and challenges are not confined to jurisdictional lines. Second is accountability, making the system more efficient and accountable, building and committing to an achievable plan, eliminating unclear and overlapping decision-making roles, and having clear mechanisms for correction where needed. The third is scope, incorporating a full spectrum of causes, impacts, and solutions to homelessness into our planning and our actions, including affordable housing as well as services and understanding links to broader regional housing needs. And lastly, outcomes, clear metrics and evidence of impact for people and communities impacted by homelessness. so we can all understand not only what we're working for, but how well we're doing. Now let's walk through each of these in more detail, what we've heard, what we've established, and how council wants to ensure that we're moving in a direction that meets the urgency of the crisis and protects the stability of the people and programs receiving this funding. Next slide. Building a truly regional system was a consistent theme from our last governance conversation and resolution number 24-5436. In that resolution, we called for the creation of a single oversight and planning body for housing and services to support a regional strategy, clearer decision-making authority, and more transparent and accountable conversations and diverse voices at the table. Regionalism is why this measure exists in the first place. In 2020, voters recognized that homelessness could not continue to be addressed in silos. The vision of making homelessness brief, rare, and non-recurring is only possible with a regional lens. Homelessness doesn't stay contained within regional lines and solutions to a crisis as complex as this one, which requires all of us to step up and take responsibility. This begins with shared definitions and standards across the region to ensure we are comparing apples to apples and effectively measuring progress and performance of the programs we're building. All the while, we're learning from best practices across the region and the nation. The 2024 Metro SHS audit identified a lack of reliability in the current program performance data due to several factors, including inconsistent definitions, goals, and performance measures. This was echoed a few weeks ago when the Housing Department and TCPB co-chair shared challenges they are currently facing because of inconsistent definitions and tracking of populations A and B, and the limited authority of the current governing bodies to rapidly and responsibly course correct. The ambiguous roles and ineffective authority structure in the current program have resulted in long delays and depleted resources spent negotiating tools that are critical to ensure improved transparency and accountability, like the regional data sharing and program monitoring. Every jurisdiction has unique needs, and we don't want to impinge on that, but to understand the need and progress towards addressing that need. We need better and consistent standards, including strengthened authority to establish those standards in a way that matches the urgency of the need at hand. Included in the proposed H2PAC model is a comprehensive regional plan with clearly defined goals and outcomes, and a requirement that local plans be built to implement the regional plan. We heard from stakeholders to inform this goal to build a truly regional system. They called for a clear regional vision, with specific outcomes and metrics that can measure progress toward and an original measure intended to do so with the creation of TCPB. There's also a lack of role clarity and clear authority, as well as ambiguous decision-making processes that have led to slow progress on building regional program. I want to focus today with you on some specific examples that I think could improve outcomes here as part of our reform package. You have seen my proposal for a new governance body, H2PAC, which was drafted this summer as a starting place for conversations with the 3 county chairs. And I believe specifically the way that body is structured will support a more effective regional program by streamlining our structure, including sunsetting the TCPB and the SHSOC, bringing more leaders, elected and community, business from across the region to the table, and tying regional goals and outcomes to specific metrics. This committee model was modeled after structures like JPAC and IMPAC, where Metro has a proven track record of bringing the region together to solve challenges. I believe this new model will allow for streamlined oversight and improved accountability through increased regional buy-in and intergovernmental coordination, including representation from counties, cities, state, and communities, as well as chambers. Councilors, the heart of our resolution was building a truly regional system. There will be details to work out in the future, but I believe we need to be on the record with our intentions. The question here for this part on regionalism is how can we best create an overall structure that can make decisions that meet the urgency of need and protect the people and programs as we move forward. I would like to open it up for conversation on this portion of it, and then we will move to the other portions, which are accountability, the scope, and outcomes. So just would love to open it up to this part of the regionalism and your thoughts on where we are today with what's on the table and what you've heard. Thanks. Please raise your hand if you'd like to comment.
No comments?
Counselors. Counselor Simpson.
Thank you so much, Madam President. We talked about a lot of these things before, and I kind of want to dive just a little bit deeper into, one of the things that comes to mind for me is how do we make sure we aren't recreating what we already have? You mentioned the TCPP was intended to build out a regional program, and I want to really understand how that's different. But also, we need an oversight structure that applies urgency to decision making, time frames to develop regional goals and metrics, processes to escalate a decision if it's getting stalled, and access to data and the ability to reassess goals based on what that data is telling us. And I would say we need to make sure that data, again, via our auditor, is standard across the region in terms of that, so that we can make sure we are actually counting apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and we are understanding how that money is being spent on population A and population B. Thank you.
Thank you, counselors. Counselor, I have to apologize. My audio on my end was not clear. So if I don't respond in real time, just let me know. If you had any questions, we'll make sure that I get them. Apologies. Counselor Lewis and then Counselor Rosenthal.
Sure, thank you. I think this is a really timely conversation. I sit on both the Tri-County Planning Body as Metro's representative and voting member, and on the Oversight Committee, where as an elected, I'm one of the 4 non-voting members. So with ideas and line of vision into how those bodies function, I think it's critical that we have one centralized committee. Too often, I see requests that get duplicated and too much confusion, time lost, as asks, requests, ideas, and documents get passed between the 2 committees. So I am very much in favor of one single body, in particular having some sort of work group or subcommittee structure that is committed and continuing the vision of the Tri-County Planning Body in terms of future forward planning. Because the Oversight Committee inherently is working in real time and backwards facing. We must at the same time have some population of that group that is looking forward. I have 2 things that I think have to be represented in the body. One is there needs to be time for conversation that goes into the texture and the non-metric level of analysis. The group gets annual reports, the same ones that we were presented with just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they get quarterly reports, often well packaged with stories of success, but the meat and potatoes is quantitative data. But at the level at which the Oversight Committee is responsible for a system, there are non-quantifiable points that the committee needs time to deliberate, and I hope that we can provide that both through their charter and through their structure. Second, I think that there are 2 ways that oversight can go. Actually, there are 3. One is a little bit more advisory. One is where we have charged our current committee, which is a simple role of look at how expenses were made and do they fit the letter of the law, the code, and the ballot measure itself. And then the third is more evaluative, and actually not only
did we meet the letter of the law, but did we make the right choices, choose the right strategies, and spend these resources, the valuable resources, in a way to actually achieve goals and the expectations of our community. So I hope that we actually lean more towards the third in looking forward, so that we can equip this body for timely feedback, for advice, for collaborative problem solving, for transparency, also for course correction. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Councilor Rosenthal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the general principles of the resolution that we passed. However, I have to condition the fact that I voted for it on some technical issues that I do not entirely agree with. We created a system we're creating a system that did not exist before, and it exceeds the technical needs of assessing and moving forward and assessing what we are going to have to do in the future. It exceeds the technical capacity of the current Metro Council. So in some sense, the Metro Council is more of an oversight. We have responsibilities, fiduciary responsibilities to the taxpayers. In that regard, what I would say is that this structure, this H2 PAC, which has to have a primary responsibility for doing some oversight, helping to create a regional system, and also assessing the long-term, short-term, intermediate term, and long-term futures, needs to be different. I do not agree that it should be on a JPAC structure, and I'll use an analogy with inheritance. For example, for JPAC, we act as executors of monies that are primarily not generated by us. In the case of this housing authority, the monies are generated by us, and we have 3 estates, and that's the county estates. The current resolution does not recognize the critical importance, I don't think, of the counties. They are important in 2 ways. One is they administer most of the SHS funds, plus they all 3 have housing authorities, so they're very critically involved. For Metro to be leading a committee where we are both the inheritors and the executors, to use the inheritance analogy, I think is not appropriate. I think we have to think of a new structure that goes above and beyond what JPAC does, where we simply are moderating. I mean, we take our cut, of course, from JPAC funds, and we have planning monies and so forth. So I would have to condition my support for the overall. I support the overall principles. I think we need a new structure moving forward. But I think we have to be more creative in thinking about how this structure is structured, and I think we have to give a strong role for the counties because they're the ones who are actually implementing and, in fact, spending most of the money. So I made a proposal about the structure. It includes representations from housing authorities, from the cities, from lived community, from the service providers, and also from the financial community. So I'll condition my support in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
And before you speak, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties on the streaming side. So if we could try just kind of speaking a little bit closer to the mic to see if that helps. I'm just trying to troubleshoot a little bit. Thank you.
Testing. All right. Great. Is that better, Georgia?
I think so.
All right. Yeah, I do have some thoughts I want to share. Also, we're kind of like in a slight work session environment, I feel too, where we're talking about some things and kind of trying to absorb what we're sharing. I can't ignore the analogy that Councilor Rosenthal just mentioned, feel like appreciate you for bringing that forward. I can't recall seeing the proposal. Maybe you could re-forward that to me, especially just because I would like to see it. I know that a few of us here sit on JPAC, and I feel like the comparisons didn't quite land with me. So maybe we can keep talking a little bit more. And also, just as I hear you talking about verbally the recommendations that you're making, I kind of actually see word for word reflected on the screen here. So I'm sure there's technical differences, but just a matter of how we get to the general sense of agreement as a council for what that means and what those words mean. So just want to kind of extend that invitation to continue working, and doing so in like a work session environment more so than a kind of council meeting stuff. But to the conversation that we're having and thoughts that I want to share, and Andy Shaw and I, we were presenting to Hillsborough City Council on Tuesday. And I think the feedback that we received there captures the complexity at hand. And just a disclaimer, Andy and I left City Hall at 10 p.m. on Tuesday. We were talking with the council for 90 minutes. I think it was much longer than anyone had anticipated. But we had a very deep discussion. Mayor Callaway made some pointed comments asking what's broken. And questioning the approach. And so, by no means do I think that we want to disregard the incredible effort and progress that our county partners and service providers have made over the last few years, and especially for Washington County and Clackamas County, who had to build something from scratch, from the ground up, to get to where we are now. I'm kind of thinking through that question about from the mayor on Tuesday. I do think that we've learned a great deal in this kind of this halfway point of implementation. That there are some cracks in the system and some cracks in the governance and oversight tools that this agency, that this council has to truly deliver on the original mission and promise to voters. And so I think that it's important for us to continue to take those lessons learned, to take feedback from the stakeholders that we're getting, because we are in this very critical phase of engagement, and to refine the North Star of this process. So, I think Council President Peterson, to your point with the oversight and the governance framework that we're seeing here, building off of what Councilor Simpson and Councilor Lewis have just said, I think that it's creating an oversight, a reset and oversight that allows for a more truly regional system that addresses a consistent program across boundaries, which is what we said we wanted to do with this regional program, and do right by people that are experiencing chronic homelessness. So I think generally that this is going in the right direction, and I do think that we're in a really critical and pivotal moment right now, that as we're doing engagement as counselors with our local government partners, with community organizations, with leaders that are interacting with this, that we're in a really critical point where I do think that we need to broaden that table of formal engagement and discussion on the technical, to what Councilor Rosenthal was talking about, in our policy making. So look forward to the continued conversation.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rosenthal, your hand is still up. Did you want to lower it? I just don't know if you had another comment, but Councilor Lewis is next. Thank you.
Sure, I wanted to raise my hand again. Coming to the defense of JPAC. The work that gets done at JPAC is about spending federal resources and bringing those resources to bear. And I do think that there's the opportunity to be inspired by how that table comes together, where there is a local plan, but in order for the local plans to get access to those larger buckets of funding, they must achieve regional goals and contribute to what we want to do as a region. That is why there's regional governance that relies on local implementation to find the success. We don't approve contracts for construction projects at JPAC. We help prioritize how money and funding applications move through the system. In terms of where we should also look to be inspired by the JPAC table, we have folks there who are elected, and their vote is equal and the same as the people at the table who are not elected. And some of the people who are not elected are there in a capacity where they are providing technical expertise and they are oftentimes themselves funders. For instance, ODOT sits at that table and not only brings forward expertise, sometimes with bias, but they also talk about how they spend their money on projects that are either parallel or sometimes in direct competition to the projects that are under discussion. And having those sightlines and awareness makes the comprehensive conversation better. The one place where I do believe we need to differ from JPAC is that in order for things to be approved through the JPAC process, you have to have the two bodies, both Metro Council and JPAC, vote on the same resolution with the exact same words in the exact same order. And I don't believe that is something that we're contemplating replicating here. So I wanted to make that explicit for the record. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add first, I don't want to cast any aspersions on JPAC. I think it's been a very functional committee. I just don't think it's the correct model. What I want to point out is that the difficulty is in creating a system that is both regional and sub-regional at the same time. We have counties that are very different in their demographics, very different in their populations, they're very different in their political ramifications in some cases. Clackamas County, for example, is only, 40% in Metro. Washington County is about 70%. Multnomah County is more than that. So we have very different administrative systems. Multnomah County deals with both the county as well as the city. So we have to create something that recognizes these regional differences, which are probably not going to go away, as well as creates an oversight on a regional basis so that there are certain things all in common and certain goals all in common, so that people see the same thing, so that the user or the needer, I should say, for somebody who needs help and support from homeless systems, sees the same system, but that not necessarily everybody has to operate in lockstep. And so there's a challenge. There's a big challenge, a duality here that we have to deal with.
But President,
Go aheher, Councilor.
yeah, I mean, we're having a conversation at this point, so I think I might as well lean into it. I mean, I don't think that this proposal and governance direction is moving beyond that. I mean, we have local implementation plans that, and the counties have their own local implementation committees that they go to as well. So, I mean, it's not like that those things are not there right now as well. So, I want to just make sure that we're connecting the dots between the program and the implementation as well, recognizing the expertise of the county. I don't think that we're saying that doesn't exist and it won't exist.
Okay.
But just want to acknowledge that we do have local implementation plans, and
yes,
local implementation has been an important part of this measure to date, and it will continue to be. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll just say the reason I started with the JPAC table is because there is the need for concurrence at this point, and we can talk about how Metro Council and the new H2PAC need to be working together, but it does, as in my proposal, have 3 councilors on it, with the chair actually being a Metro councilor. So I think that's a good tie. And I'd love to hear more, Councilor Lewis, about how you think the two should work together. If not like JPAC, if not concurrent, if no concurrency is required, then we need to figure out what is that relationship so that the roles and responsibilities are clear, right? Because that was our goal. I think the other point I would just make about this is that when we started to have this conversation, when we put it to the voters, I think they would have expected that we would be moving in the direction that no matter how you enter the system as a person in need, no matter what your geography, no matter what your issue is at that moment, that you will be automatically entered into the entirety of the system. And that's going to take some time to get there, but I think that's the expectation. Now, how each county goes about getting there, I think is up to them. But I think the expectation is that we move people as quickly out of homelessness and move them as quickly into services as we possibly can. And right now, when we talk about data and data collection, we know that we are increasing shelter beds. We know that we have, as a region, together been able to move more people out of homelessness, but also keep them in their existing housing so that they aren't homeless. But we don't know is how difficult was it for them to enter the system? How long did they wait to get a shelter bed? How long did they wait in shelter to move on? How long did they wait to get services? And were the services easily accessible, or was it really difficult? Those are the types of things that when we say regionalize the program, we should be holding ourselves accountable to a higher standard of how people are being moved through the system and our success rate, which we're going to get to. But we haven't been able to have those conversations as a region and hold ourselves up to a standard that we all want to move to. And a lot of that with this proposed model of H2PAC is that we don't have co-ownership over the problem and the solutions. We have a very disjointed oversight system that can account for these issues, but has no decision-making authority as an elected body to be able to make changes. So what we're doing is we're trying to marry both sides of this equation of those with experience out in the field, those with expertise, and those with the ability to move agencies and organizations and money in the right direction. So I think we're all heading in this direction, but I just wanted to acknowledge out loud, these are the problems we're trying to solve for. Nobody's trying to say that there aren't differences between the three counties, but there should be expectations of how we're moving people through the system and moving them on to success. And we haven't been able to get to those conversations yet as a region and decide what we're trying to achieve. So any other comments at this point? All right, let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. And that is scope. I'll start while we're waiting for that. Has it changed on your end? There we go. All right, the next area to discuss for this governance structure is the scope of the work overall. By integrating the coordination and incentivizing acquisition, preservation, and development of affordable housing, as a charge of this body, we can more effectively link future housing investments with our regional homelessness strategies. Based on the resolution and subsequent discussions we've had, the vision of H2PAC would serve two key functions in this regard: recommending distribution of funds from housing allocation and associated goals and metrics related to housing funded from this allocation. Coordination and discussion of the local housing needs analysis, housing plans, and regional housing coordination strategy. In other words, not proposing that we as H2PAC or Metro Council have oversight of those housing, the production plans that the cities are required or the counties are required to come up with. That actual oversight is at the state level, but this would allow for the opportunity for coordination and alignment with regional strategies for housing fund deployment. Ensuring that the table represents the right set of expertise as well, and representation will lend confidence to the decisions and authority given to this table. The resolution described at a high level, a proposal for those who would sit on H2PAC. And you've seen the circulated proposal with more details of a possible structure, but this is not necessarily something that must be set in stone before a measure. The questions for council today on this, and again, I want to focus on making sure a change in this area meet the urgency of need and respect the stability of our existing programs. One area to directly discuss today is the future of the Housing Bond Oversight Committee. The Affordable Housing Bond has delivered strong results. Ordinance 19-1430, which was adopted following the passage of the 2018 Affordable Housing Bond, stated that the committee would be dissolved on July 1st, 2028, or upon the issuance of a final report by the committee after all funds authorized by the Affordable Housing Bond Measure 26199 have been spent, which we expect to be fully spent by 2028. We asked staff to recommend a future for the committee, and the Housing Department recommends that the Housing Bond Oversight Committee continue its work until the current bond is fully authorized, while coordinating closely with H2PAC. The question for the council is, how can we support the coordination between the Affordable Housing Bond Oversight Committee and H2PAC and ensure their expertise is incorporated into a new model, including the representation members and lessons learned, like upfront planning? Are there any reflections, council, on how our considerations for scope can best meet the urgency and protect the stability of existing programs and people who depend on them? Now I'll open it back up for comment. Councilor Lewis.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I am continuously going to underscore that I think that the focus of this table needs to be on affordable housing, not housing affordability, because that is a larger problem than this table will be able to bite off and even begin to chew. But in terms of looking through city and county housing production strategies, there is a need for us to have regional coordination, both talking about the balance between investing and building new housing and acquisition of aging or otherwise housing stock that is coming out of buy-in of affordability, and also rehab strategies. We also have never really explicitly talked about how there are still some mid-sized cities that do not have any regulated and intentional affordable housing, while other parts of our region and other cities, both through the bond, might have multiple projects and through naturally occurring affordable housing, have carried the load for the region. So it is a regional level conversation this table should have with intentionality. So I'm supportive of this general direction, although continuing to underscore the slice of the pie being in intentionality and in bringing resource to bear equitably across the region for affordable housing.
Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal, and then Simpson, and then Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support and agree with what Councilor Lewis has just said. The only thing I want to say is a point of clarification. I assume it's implied in, for example, the third bullet of the side where it says coordinate with city, county housing production strategies. I want to make 2 points. One, first of all, we have at least one housing authority which is not part of the city county. So housing authorities are also important in this. And the other point is I would add state, just to make, I'm sure it's implied, but for example, state housing strategies for affordable housing also affect, there are people who need low-income housing who work in the Sherwood area, for example, that commute from Salem. There's people in the Canby area that commute into the Oregon City area. So we have to be concerned not just with the metro area, but with the housing strategies statewide, and particularly those in the surrounding communities that are in our workshed, you might say. So I'm sure those are implied, but just to add an extra note to bring them out.
Thank you. Councilor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to reiterate what Councilor Lewis mentioned, to be really clear that what populations we're serving and where dollars should be spent. And as important, what is out of scope should be defined so that we can have a clear understanding of where gaps and lags exist in the system. I think it also applies to what I spoke of earlier around urgency, because with clear scope, it allows a focus on how we develop goals and outcomes for this regional program.
Thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like adding my 2 cents here as well is thinking through the affordable housing segment. I think is there needs to be a really clear call out for the deeply affordable slash PSH units that are needed to support the work that the services is doing and the people that we want to serve. So as we evaluate that, and generally, I know that I mean, I feel like right now, when it comes to housing, we have a lot of plans, a lot of strategies. There's a housing needs analysis. I mean, every local jurisdiction is doing planning work left and right. I think that I'm hopeful that the HPAC or this kind of will be able to think about how does the region bring resources to building, to making processes and permitting, shortening those. And when we talk about I know that the conversations have been around workforce housing and different levels of affordability, but I think those are areas that are we can approach in policy and make changes to allow for that. Frankly, we have a vote that's going to help us add more housing capacity, which I think is an important step. But that is one tool, one in a quiver that we have to continue to address housing supply in the region. Anyway, this is not even related to SHS anymore, but I do think that for the specific focus of this, we do need to focus on housing affordability at deeper levels, and the integrations that we can make with the services that are going to be offered is going to be of paramount importance. And then creating opportunities for other things beyond that will be important, and having a big tent is good. But to me, that focus is kind of front and center right now.
Just a quick follow-up, just for clarification, on councilors who have, and I think rightly so, pointed out that the language should be around coordination of affordable housing. We are talking about the scope being private and public, correct? Not just public.
Can you say more? What you mean by that? Sorry, just
I mean that while the market may not provide 0 to 30 of median income for housing, but above that, we're looking for a range of workforce housing all the way through, correct? We're not, when we say affordable, I'm just trying to get a scope. For me, it's a range of private provided housing as well as public provided housing to meet the needs of affordable housing in its entirety. Reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess since I'm off mute, I'll say generally, yes, that sounds right. And like the housing production side and how we work with the private sector and our builders, and in addition to the public resources that we have and the right focused areas, to me, generally, that sounds right. But also, I think it like brings the question to mind. It's like, I think a lot of the cities and the counties are they want to do that as well. So I feel like from our time on the council that we've been able to share together, the areas that Metro has had the most influence is when we're able to bring resources to like ease where the constraints are. And so kind of going back to, again, the last conversation we're having around another thing that JPAC does really well around like our joint legislative agendas that we have in which we approach the state or we approach the federal government in terms of funding strategies, but also ways that we try and make project delivery faster and more comprehensive and things like that. So, yes.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis had pointed that out before I go on to Councilor Wong and Councilor Nolan. Just any response, Councilor Lewis, just for clarification, private and public?
Private and public dollars, yes.
In terms of private development and public development for affordable housing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Wong?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Overall, I'm generally supportive of this direction as well. The first bullet here around allocation proposal to prioritize stable base allocation, I think that warrants a little more discussion. I really do believe that we need to have that minimum floor for our partners, just because of the underlying, funding stream. So, we might have some boom years, some bust years. So, like, how do we stabilize that is really important. So, I think setting a floor is required. But once that floor is required or set, does that floor then move? And is that something that's under the purview of this committee? Or I just want to tease that out a bit more of like, does that floor move over time, and then who makes that decision?
I think that's a good question, and something that our partners have asked of when would H2PAC basically make a recommendation or review how things are going, right? And I think that we can definitely tease that out a little more, like you say. I think what I want to be careful of in any review is that if our goal is stability, then it can't be every 18 months that we're reviewing these things, right? And it can't be too long. Otherwise, you've missed the opportunity to make a change if you know you have to. So I would say, just to put a number out, every 5 to 6 years, a reevaluation, we could bake that in. And if there's an emergency of some sort, we could put that in there. Of course, you can come up and make another recommendation if there's agreement, but I think baking in a full review of how things are going and whether funding levels need to change. But then again, we also need to clarify what the role of the Metro Council is in that, and how that would work if changes were made, right? We just have to clarify that out. So I think something like that does need to be baked into this. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure there's like a set understanding from the get-go about how the allocation is made and how it changes, because I think that's one of the primary functions of this committee, and we all need to be on the same page when we start.
Yes. Thank you. Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Madam President. On that point about frequency of review, I think it's a good idea for us to establish a pretty rigorous review. We're moving into a new approach to this if the voters approve this. And I would recommend that we review it every 3 years. We can always loosen that. It's much harder to tighten it later if the experience suggests that it should be tightened. Moving from 3 to 5 is easier than starting with 5 and then saying, hey, things are not going well in the 3rd year. We're going to review this now. I would encourage us to think about that. The other thought I have on this when we talk about affordable housing and whether it is subsidized or naturally occurring or market affordable housing, somewhere in this process, and I think this oversight, or I hope it's not just an oversight committee, but a forward-looking committee, as Councillor Lewis has said. But we need to have a Hippocratic oath for affordable housing, and that is first do no harm. Do not contribute to artificially inflating market rents by the actions that we take, which could itself put more households, more families just out of stability. And that's a challenging thing to do because while we want expertise in different professions or approaches, we also want to make sure that we have people who see the problem not just as something that can be solved by what my profession does, but here's a problem, here's a need, And that's not an area where my profession, my organization, my type of organization can be valuable, but we instead highlight another. And in making sure that the composition and the way that this committee functions encourages that kind of simultaneous engagement of expertise, but removal of financial interest. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Councillor Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we're also considering and borrowing from other metro processes. I think like having some predictability like we do for the urban growth boundary, where we have a 6-year process and then mid-cycle review, or the RTP every 5 years. Like, I think having that sort of predictability that we have in other processes for this would be helpful as well. And just a minor detail, if we can time it so we don't do all 3 in the same year, that would be really nice for all of us. So on the off years of RTP or UGB, that might be a good time to have this conversation as well. Thanks.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Councilors, thank you. I appreciate the conversation and the clarifications on this. It turns out I did skip a slide, and that was why there was a delay. I skipped the accountability slide. So if we could go back to that. Thank you. Before I move on, Marisa, did you have any observations either on the regionalism or scope of what you've heard?
Thank you, President Peterson. I heard really strong theme coming through that is consistent with the feedback that we got from stakeholders, that the focus and the scope should be on affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, and permanent supportive housing. Heard support for coordination with state county housing production strategies.
Several comments around having stability of frequency of review of the allocation, predictability, and alignment with the other processes that we have and other timelines that we have at Metro. And also want to just call out Councilor Nolan's comments about doing no harm, the Hippocratic Oath. There was definitely a theme from our stakeholders about kind of the ethics of being on these committees, and making sure that conflicts are clear and disclosed. And so in your comments, I hear a call for kind of coming to the table for the common good with the expertise from the specific industry, but intentionally setting aside those not being at the tables just to represent your specific expertise. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you. I think I heard something very similar, and appreciate that. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to accountability. The direction provided to staff in Resolution 245436 and discussed by Council in recent work sessions included improved oversight and accountability structures, focusing on transparency and clear roles and responsibilities. Improving oversight and accountability is critical for Metro Council. We've heard that a lot. And if we are to be in the role of a regional funder and fulfill our promises to the voters. For example, it would be the sole responsibility of the government imposing a tax on behalf of voters to execute basic accountability and oversight functions with the recommendation of an advisory body. In this case, H2PAC. And I think the question that has been raised is, I don't think that H2PAC is actually an advisory body to Metro Council. And so we need to figure out that role and responsibility and balance so that it's clear whether it is advisory or whether it is making decisions, and just we need to be in concurrence. So some of the functions included in setting standards and definitions, requiring reporting, monitoring and evaluation, Project approvals and corrective measures when necessary would be part of the role of this body, H2PAC, which is why I don't think it's advisory if we are also giving them the ability to do project approvals and require reporting and corrective measures. In Resolution 24-5436, we established that H2PAC be responsible for developing the regional action plan, review and recommend approval or not of local plans that implement the regional action plan before the start of the fiscal year and distribution of funding. That H2PAC would also identify regional KPMs, key performance metrics. The resolution says Metro Council will establish interim KPMs based on existing programmatic goals and commitments in the meantime. I propose we begin that process in the coming months so that we have established that as soon as possible so that we can have that up and running as soon as the new body is impaneled. We propose sunsetting the SHS Regional Oversight Committee in my proposal and the TCPB and creating one table in H2PAC to support increased role clarity by eliminating duplication and confusion about roles between the two existing committees. The resolution also proposes that H2PAC be supplemented by independent financial and performance reviews, a technical committee of staff, and meaningful processes and structure for input from people with lived experience of homelessness, the service providers, and the existing TCPB members. The idea as of today was to move the TCPB temporarily under the technical staff body as a subcommittee to ensure an effective transition of expertise and knowledge about their work and recommendations. So today, for our conversation, we need structures that meet the urgency and protect the stability of existing programs. And I would propose that our accountability structures build on best practices for other funders like the federal and state governments. Does this seem like the right approach to you? Is anything missing? And how should accountability and compliance structures with the counties best meet the urgency of need and protect the stability of the existing programs? Council, thoughts on this, delving down into the next layer of discussion on that in terms of accountability? Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a couple thoughts. And some of these are implied. For example, for just transitioning oversight and tri-county planning roles, I think we also need to stress that the H2PAC will also be responsible for making predictive kind of assessments. In other words, where are we going? Is the service level going to be changing vis-a-vis the housing needs, et cetera, et cetera? So they're going to have a predictive role. They're going to have to take data in and make some, so they're going to have some technical abilities. I also, and I think it's implied, but when we talk about providers, I think we need to be very clear that we're talking about both service providers as well as the financial community, which provides some of the funding or some of the options for funding for for housing, whether it's conversions or preservation or new construction. And then finally, I think probably the most complicated part is going to be determining what the HHPAC will have advice from technical committees as well as its own technical expertise, and it's going to be making a lot of it could be making a lot of decisions. I agree with President Peterson that it's more than just advisory. It'll be making some decisions on its own, which probably are more technical than what the Metro Council will be able to weigh in on specifically. So the question is how we define what areas it gets to make decisions and what areas particularly it gets to pass on to the Metro Council for decision making, such as overall efficiency, overall spending priorities. There's some larger scale things that the Metro cannot shirk its responsibilities to the voters because of the tax measure. So I think defining exactly those roles is going to be a very important and critical task.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis and then Simpson.
Sure, thank you. The tools that the current oversight structure uses are an annual report process and a corrective action plan. The annual report process is in-depth and slow. So by the time we receive recommendations, we are like 9 months down the field. Corrective action plan is the opposite. It is timely. It is every month. It is real time reporting, but it is not as in depth, and it is in fact narrowly scoped to the items that the oversight committee were able to name as top priorities for monitoring. And I do think we need some level of intervention that is in between or that takes the best of both worlds. And I do believe that the corrective action plan was viewed a little bit as an exercise in documentation, and it needs to be looked at more as a joint effort, collaboration, and a spirit of moving faster, better, or with more urgency. I think the opportunity for real conversation at the oversight committee can also bring us more information that our staff can use to dig in. I've had conversations with members of the current oversight committee who have experienced frustration because they see plans that were written for a 1 year time horizon or 3 year time horizons that have not yet been updated. So yes, Metro has a way to negotiate through that at the IGA level, but what's the responsibility of the oversight committee, and what's the community responsibility to work with the county to come up with the community's expectation for this program moving forward? So I do think that accountability is a really critical thread in anything we do as a next step.
Thank you. Councilor Simpson?
Thank you, Madam President. Look, we need clearer authority. A challenge with the current SHS program is an over-reliance on co-creation and required agreements and implementation partners on basic oversight standards like access to regional data and program monitoring. In order to make this program more effective, we need to clearly define what each role is responsible for, but this also means ensuring implementation partners are clear of their authority. The on-the-ground implementation strategies must be within their control, but they'll need to demonstrate how those strategies directly address the regional goals and population focuses that we have set forth in that measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wong?
Thank you, Madam President. I also agree with this approach. I do think we need to clarify, the procedures and authority that the committee has. But I want to make sure on the front end we have a process in place, and then I think it's probably through the appointment process to really set the table and culture of this committee. And that's not necessarily kind of just in the legal documents, but like the regional approach that is needed. So I think this committee is going to be discussing and having really hard conversations around what's the highest and best use of these public dollars to make the most impact in our communities. And I don't know how best to do that, but just setting the tone of like the folks that are here are not here to maximize the dollars to their sector, industry, or government or entity, but that we're really on the same page and building a regional system together where we can have that clear policy debate. So I think that's maybe in the appointment process of just like how this committee is structured and created and who makes those appointments. But I don't know, maybe in the application materials as well. It's just like we really want people that are here, for the right reasons. Maybe I watch Bachelor too much, but that we just hear about a lot of like, are you here to have that debate, or are you here to maximize, what you get out of it? So I'll just leave that at that.
Thank you, Councilor Wong. I think all of you brought up several good points, and I'm going to put some very specific questions back out based on those. And and then ask Marisa to summarize what we hear, and we can move on to the last one, which is outcomes. But I guess I'd like to get a little bit more clarity right now for staff to be able to put together the draft resolution that we will be looking at in the next 2 weeks and get input on. But I would love to have a little bit more clarity about how we see the role of the Metro Council and the role of H2PAC more specifically, and how we integrate them in. I'll start with Councilor Lewis because you would kind of put it on the table if you have any more specificity. But I guess my question is the Metro Council in your thought process represented on H2PAC, and basically it's functioning as a MERC, right? Or is it a new hybrid? But or is it only that when things can't get decided at H2PAC, it rises up to the Metro Council for a decision? Or is it a concurrence? Like, on that range of possible scenarios, what are you thinking?
Definitely not like Mark. My eyes started to twitch when you said that. I'm not sure that I think concurrence necessarily is a good governance model for something that needs to move so quickly. Because if there are things that are significant enough to come up to the Metro Council level, I think that is, maybe there's two bands of accountability tools. One that the committee itself is authorized, and then the other is more of a, we've tried our lower tier level of tools. We haven't seen the course correction, or there's still an outcome problem or accountability problem, and then it gets kicked up to us and we have different tools. I don't necessarily want us to get into the place where Metro is trying to always have more control. I think we want to have more transparency and more carrots and sticks for the community to get the outcomes that they need.
Interesting. Let me put it back out as, do you see, for instance, the compliance portion of it resting with Metro Council at the high level, and some other tools for H2PAC to not have to ever get to a non-compliance issue? Does it raise up to Metro at that point? Is that the deciding point?
Well, I think there's a lot of compliance that staff hold that even to this date have not even come up much through the oversight committee. So Metro Council does need, I think, more lines of sight to IGA level compliance.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts on that? And the role of Metro and its integration with H2PAC? Okay. And Councilor Nolan, sorry.
Sorry. I don't imagine or invite a situation where Metro Council remakes every decision or every guidance that this committee would make. But I do think there are some things that can't be delegated. Appropriation of funds seems to me to be one that should not be delegated to a body that doesn't represent a majority of any of the governing bodies that are represented. I think key decisions like that should be made by bodies that are directly accountable to the voters. And I don't think that needs to be, in fact, I think it shouldn't be everything that comes before this committee. But I do think we are smart enough here to draw the line of the things that have to be, that can be recommended to the council, but have to be finally decided by the council.
Yeah, we need to be clear about that list.
Yep.
Agreed. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I agree with Councilor Nolan. I think there's basically three areas. There's areas where things will be delegated to H2PAC, such as specifics of the corrective action plans, which may involve, specific actions and data gathering exercises and so forth. And I think there's areas where it might function as a JPAC kind of council where they will make a recommendation and we have to concur. And then I agree with Councillor Nolan that there are areas where we cannot delegate that authority, such as the overall allocation of funds. So I think defining that is, I think we have the staff capacity and expertise to do that, but it's not going to be an entirely easy task.
Thank you. I think I've created a little bit of confusion just by the pure name of going from off of JPACT and MPAC. The word advisory is actually in the names of those. And I think what we're discussing here is that they are not just advisory, but they are a decision-making body on a series of things that we need to be very clear about. But they do not operate alone. They operate in tandem with the Metro Council on some higher level, bigger decision-making things. So we may want to think about whether we continue to use the word advisory body, because I think we've just hybridized it to something else in this discussion. But JPAC has most of that authority now, and it's called advisory. So I think that's where the clarification needs to be made of what will we mean if we continue to say advisory, correct? Just looking for head nods.
JPAC can't do anything on its own, right?
Anyway, Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, thanks, President Peterson. I was planning to have to think about the semantics of the word advisory, but here I am. I think we have a lot of committees that advise the Metro Council, but they don't have the word advisory in them. So we might be conflating too much the example with what is in writing. So I'm just kind of giving us some grace in there, but this will be important. I did have a question for clarification because in kind of some of the field engagement and conversations that I've had and some of the letters that we've received from some of the main stakeholders that have been a part of the evaluation of this process, there has been a request, I guess you could say, or a reference to the installation of and I'll quote here, air quote, independent watchdog, and not something that I support, and I'm not seeing that reflected in the framework of what you're bringing to us for governance, accountability, and oversight. So I just want to make it abundantly clear, what is kind of the conversation then with that and the role that would play, given the conversation we're having on here and what's on paper in front of us now, or digitally with the screen.
No, thank you for bringing that up. We have definitely heard that that's something that folks would like. I think I think there's a range of ways we could go with this if we were to include it in the structure. The first thought that I had was that we bring on as a committee the Metro Auditor and the 3 county auditors and ask them to do a review. I have heard back from the Metro Auditor that is not a way that they would like to go. I have not talked to the county auditors because it sounded like it was pretty clear that auditors want to be independent and decide when and how they audit.
Yeah.
So as an independently elected officials, that's something. There's another way we could go with that same sort of thought, and it is to have a committee, an independent oversight committee, to do some very specific things from outside auditors, or if it was just financial auditors, right? So it depends on what that independent oversight is to do. Is it for the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the program in terms of outcomes? Is it on the governance? are we, right? Like, what is the role of that independent oversight committee? And or is it something completely different that is a day-to-day
Right.
a day-to-day kind of thing? I think there's a range of possibilities here, and I'm not sure that all of the ideas have gotten on the table yet, but we are pursuing that with folks thinking about that.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm definitely glad I asked, and hope that we can have more conversations like the one we're having now. If any of those ideas continue to advance, because I feel like there are a lot of different ways that the spirit of that function could be implemented within the proposed existing framework, and kind of where the oversight and accountability lives. I mean, we're having a conversation about that with these slides and the language that we're reading and understanding. So I also had that in the back of my mind because I know it's been kind of floating around in the ether with ideas and conversations. And given what we've talked about, trying to reconcile what that might mean, and it's not aligning. So we'll continue to have conversations.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to streamline things, and so if we streamline things and we still pursue this thought, it has to be very clear what the independent oversight is trying to achieve, that H2PAC is not already going to be doing.
Yeah.
So,
okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, we'll move on to outcomes. You can go to that slide. Thank you. This last area for this governance discussion is to focus on ensuring outcomes for the people receiving services and access to housing and homelessness services. We need clear metrics and evidence of impact for people and communities impacted by homelessness, so everyone can understand not only what we're working for, but how well we're doing. This is something we clearly heard throughout the process. Resolution 24-5436 establishes that Metro and H2PAC need to set clear metrics, have improved visibility and input into programmatic data tracking, and establish reporting standards. Standardized data sharing, reporting, monitoring, evaluation, the tools for the evaluation processes, as well as access to data and financial information will help us and H2PAC determine if implementation partners are adhering to requirements and commitments. As I shared earlier, the current structure has inhibited Metro and the current oversight body's ability to implement structures such as these. Changes in oversight must address this head on. As with other categories that we discussed, how can our structure in the area of outcomes best meet the urgency of need and protect the stability of existing programs and people who depend on them? And that is really the question on the table for council. And remember, we had also talked about, in terms of at least a North Star and key performance metrics in order to start aligning things in the right direction as soon as these folks are impaneled, with the opportunity for them to morph that and play with it. But we need to provide that up front because we still don't have them after 3.5 years. Councillor Nolan.
Commenting on this? Outcomes?
Yep.
Seems to me that we have really one outcome, that this measure, as it was currently approved by voters and as we're contemplating asking them to approve changes, is how quickly we get to functional zero in homelessness. The outcome is that the region and individuals in it experience homelessness rarely, short-term, and non-recurring. And measuring how close we're getting to that as an outcome that a human being experiences very personally in their life, as opposed to how many reports they submitted or how many dollars they spent or how many beds they made available, without even measuring how often those beds are occupied, misses the point. So somewhere here, we really have to highlight the progress we collectively, Metro, the counties, all the partners, are making to having nobody sleeping outside tonight. And then making sure nobody sleeps outside tomorrow night. And then nobody sleeps outside over the weekend. And all the other key performance measurements are just measuring how well or how quickly we're getting there. Those aren't the outcomes. They're the process by which we achieve the outcome.
Thank you. Counselor Simpson, and then Rosenthal, and then Gonzalez and Wong.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to reiterate what I've shared previously, and that's we need time frames to establish the first set of regional goals and outcomes. We need an escalation processes if decisions get stalled. We need commitment to maintain the good work and progress of the TCPB on regional priorities. And we need to identify corrective action strategies if parties are off course or data is telling us we're not meeting the intended goals. And, that just really goes back to program monitoring and with any project, right? Like we're having these very hard and complex issues around, project and in project management language. Like some of the things that we're asking for are very basic. And that is frustrating in the sense that, like, in terms of like data and things like that, we have to report back to voters and it comes back to us. So those are the outcomes that I'm looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two thoughts here. First of all, implied or implicit in this is that there's also going to be a communication function, whether it's communicating what's going on with the neighborhoods or with the business groups or with the supportive service groups and so forth. So the question is exactly how that's going to roll out. That's something to be considered. And then there's quite a task of regional standards for data procurement, contracting, and other issues. We may have to consider whether or not the H2PAC will have to have its own dedicated staff to deal with these, such that they're not diverted by other kinds of considerations. They can respond directly to H2PAC in real time, in a quick time, and have their own access to data. So I just think something to consider.
Thank you, Counselor. I believe that Mehdi said that our intent is that the existing SHS program staff and the existing planning staff that oversee the housing needs analysis would both be supporting H2PAC, and we wouldn't need
Correct.
any more staff than that. Okay,
Correct.
thank you. Just for clarification. All right, Counselor Gonzalez and Lewis.
Yeah, thanks for helping to clarify that, because I think all of the committees are all of our committees are staffed, right? So, okay, great. I think for this specific slide on demonstrating outcomes, like I'm resisting like my temptation to want to name what those outcomes should be, but I think more so the high level themes that I'm seeing come across here are an acknowledgement that there are some with our governance, the kind of some of the fundamental issues that we're having across the streamlining of governance is like the ability to across a multi-county regional system, like set common definitions for high-level program materials, high-level priorities around the basic sharing of things like program data and things like that. So I think yes to everything that's been shared, but those are kind of some of the high-level things. And then when we do have those experts coming together in a consolidated, clear, coordinated body, those experts will help advise the council and the region on what those measurable goals are. But I'm kind of thinking through the governance changes that are needed for us to get to that place of common definitions and common approaches for a regional system, not necessarily multiple systems within a regional system. So that's a thumbs up for me.
Great, thank you. Counselor Lewis.
Sure, absolutely want to underscore it's unacceptable that we are flying essentially blind because we don't have access to raw data of any kind because we've been working through negotiations for 2 years. We have incredible staff who are able to tell us a lot based off of the reports we get, but imagine what we would be able to measure and talk about if we could see what was actually happening if we had access to regional data. I also think that it's important to put out there that the work of outcomes has to be put into context because while we have incredible amount of resources that come in through this tax, there has also been an incredible escalation in the resources that the three counties receive through state and other channels, including some of the counties put forward programs from their general funds. And without the context of what is happening with those other funds, it is hard to say what exactly is happening on the ground because of these funds versus other funds. So my 2 points are data is necessary for outcome, both in measurement and in setting renewed goals. And second, the context of other funds feels really critical.
Yeah, I think that has definitely been a point of misunderstanding that when people want to see progress, they want to see it by fund in totality, not just by the singularity of this funding, because it is all stacked up to make sure that we have a complete system. And that system is not, we're not able to get our arms around the entirety of the system. And so total in agreement on bringing up that inherent problem that we have within the system right now of just having this money on the table doesn't mean that's the only money that should be reported on. It's the system that needs to be discussed. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Marisa and look to some observations, some summary on this. I appreciate it. I was going to try to do that at every slide, but honestly forgot. So just looking to you for a little bit of summary.
Thank you. Thank you, President Peterson. And just before I summarize, did want to just because it didn't come up explicitly that these changes in governance are in the context of this program, including affordable housing as well as supportive housing services, and so just want to for those listening clarify that your discussion is about more than just correcting the SHS portion of this work going forward, but creating a table and governance that allows the incorporation of these other investments in supportive housing services and permanent supportive housing. And then to summarize, what I heard was that that North Star that we've described in the past, that homelessness should be brief, rare, and non-recurring. It needs to guide the outcomes. That we should be measuring both the goal of no one sleeping outside and the drivers of process that we know we need to do to get there. In order to achieve those outcomes, we need escalation processes if decisions get stalled. We need a commitment to maintain the work and the progress of the TCBB on regional priorities. That there needs to be corrective action strategies if parties are off course or data is telling us we're not meeting those goals. That we need data, that regional data, common definitions, and making sure that we are analyzing that data that we have, and that the outcomes are put into context of the other funds that are being contributed across the region. Hopefully I didn't miss anything.
Awesome. Thank you. Last slide. We've had a good conversation today, and there are more to come. We've established many of our priorities for governance already through Resolution 24-5436. So today, we discussed how to reflect urgency and respect stability as we operationalize those priorities in a future program. There are some things I believe we need to establish now, and this is based on what we've heard from our partners, provider and business coalition leaders, and in public opinion research. I want to wrap by proposing several elements of governance that I think I'm hearing from council as well, and must be commitments we make to voters and partners of whatever we adopt or refer. I would propose that these elements are creating an H2 PAC to provide increased transparent oversight with membership that includes local elected officials, housing services and economic experts and stakeholders and business folks from across the region, clearing up overlapping and unclear roles and responsibilities in the current system to build a more accountable and responsive regional system. And that includes establishing escalating authority so that the development of regional goals and outcomes isn't stalled in a bureaucratic process, and a way to reassess those goals in response to change in the overall landscape. We need to create a regional homelessness and affordable housing action plan that includes allowable costs, standards, definitions, reporting, and other programmatic requirements, and require that investments funded by this tax are required to meet it. Establishing a process for review and approval of those plans and proposed investments prior to distribution. That are consistent with the existing best practices and tools for government funders, and requiring detailed public disclosure of all spending and outcomes from the measure, as well as other homelessness and housing funding in the region. This isn't the final word on any of these issues, but do councilors agree these should be all clearly laid down in a measure? Just looking for head nods. All right, thank you. If there's anything else that you want to get on the table that I didn't mention, now would be a good time to just quickly bring it up. Or let me know later. All right, we'll finalize this off. Next steps, conversations with our county and city partners are continuing, as you know, along with business and advocates. I know everyone agrees it's important we protect the stability of the program and the people it serves, and meet the urgency of the need. I'm hopeful we can find some consensus on allocation and governance. I think hearing council's direction today is very helpful to frame that up. We will return in 2 weeks to discuss how we bring this all together, looking ahead to a potential adoption of an ordinance and ballot measure referral in early next year. I'll leave you with this last thought. There are those challenging us as to why now. My answer is that people are relying on us to make sure this program is as effective as possible. And those doing the hard work on the ground need us to have this conversation, but to also make well thought out changes as quickly as possible and not leave them in the lurch, knowing when or how changes may occur. It is not good for us to continue conversations indefinitely and letting these issues that we are currently challenged with spin out of control. Change must happen, but it must happen with thoughtfulness and clear intentions for better outcomes for everyone. So I am just very grateful in the leadership of this council and the fact that we are moving with deliberation towards a decision. Councilor Gonzalez, did you have something to add?
Yeah, President Peterson, I didn't mean to interrupt you though. Want to make sure you wrapped up. No, I made a comment earlier during the first slide, and you asked for a head nod, and definitely see a lot of alignment, and also want to acknowledge that as so many of us have been working to also do a good push of engagement. I think we have a really important window to again broaden that table of engagement and bring people to the table to evaluate these things on a deeper level. Just look forward to working with you on that. So just, yeah, it's high level there.
Yeah, much appreciated. Any other final thoughts? Okay, thank you everyone for that helpful conversation, and we will continue to move forward. Next on the agenda is ordinances. We have a second reading and vote on ordinance number 24-1520 for the purpose of expanding the urban growth boundary to provide capacity for housing and employment to the year 2044 and amending the Metro Code to conform. Today, we are considering the proposed 2020-40 urban growth management decision. On November 21st, we held a first reading and public hearing on this ordinance. The record for submitting written testimony remained open until Wednesday, November 27th, and is now closed. We received written and oral testimony from dozens of community members and organizations who represented a wide range of viewpoints. Metro began working towards this urban growth management decision nearly 2 years ago. Coming to a decision on that urban growth boundary requires careful consideration of population trends, buildable land, feedback from stakeholders and local governments, input from residents, and incorporating the feedback from this council. Over the past 2 years, our staff in planning, research, and development have walked us through these elements step by step, and I want to extend my thanks for all the work they have put into the ordinance before us today. As you all know, today's decision is made pursuant to a state requirement that Metro Council determine whether the urban growth boundary has adequate land for expected housing and job growth. In our last agenda item, we discussed the future of funding for affordable housing and homelessness services, but there are more tools at our disposal to make progress and relieve this crisis. As part of Metro's unique role maintaining our region's urban growth boundary, we have an opportunity to encourage the development of new homes to stem the rapid rise in housing costs and spur job growth in our economy. We do have on, if there are any questions for staff, there are staff that are here, both Aaron Key and Ted Reed are available for questions and any presentation. I don't believe there is a presentation today. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. So if there are any questions for staff at this time before we go into deliberation, now would be the time. Councilor Rosenthal, and I'm sorry, I can't tell if staff have come forward yet, so.
That was accidental.
Go ahead, Councilor.
No, just my cursor slipped.
Oh, okay, thank you. Seeing no questions for staff, I will call for a motion on ordinance number 24-1520 for the purpose of expanding the urban growth boundary to provide capacity for housing and employment to the year 2044 and amending the Metro Code to conform. Do I have a motion?
I would move to adopt ordinance 24-1520.
I will second that motion.
It's been moved by Councilor Rosenthal and seconded by Councilor Gonzalez. Thank you. Councilors, any discussion? Councilor Rosenthal and then Gonzalez and Nolan.
Yeah, I just want to make actually a comment. First of all, I want to thank the Sherwood staff and their governing bodies for their persistence, their patience, and their endurance on this process. Sometimes I wonder whether there's a way to do it a little more quickly. I think that they've been very thorough. I think they followed all the rules. They've, crossed the T's and dotted the I's. And I also want to thank our staff for working with them very assiduously on coming up with conditions that are both realistic as well as progressive. So I think it's been a very thorough process, and I look forward to the kinds of work that they're going to do. As I said in the previous statement, I think now the hard work is coming for the city of Sherwood staff. Now they have to actually come up with a comprehensive plan that's going to try and meet some of their aspiration goals, and that's we can help them perhaps a little bit, but it's going to be the work is going to be mostly done with them. They've done a lot, and so I look forward to continuing to work with Sherwood on what's going forward. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Gonzalez, Nolan, Lewis, and Vaughn.
Yeah, thanks, President Peterson, and definitely think it's fitting for Councilor Rosenthal, this is in your district, to thank the Sherwood staff who are here with us, and so thank you for your hard work. And he's right, you have a lot of work ahead of you, but this is a great process, and we appreciate you. And I also see our staff in the wings, so I want to call them out as well. Catherine, your team, Aaron Key, Ted Reed, Malou, Roger and I'm sure there's way more folks too that have worked to get this process going forward. And I know urban growth management is one of the core responsibilities of this agency, and a role that we play in the region, balancing the many needs that we have to preserve our most important places, but also to deliver the housing that people need to live and to be able to prosper. And this expansion decision is giving us the opportunity to plan for in the next few years for thousands of housing units and thousands of high quality jobs that will hopefully pay dividends for generations. So we're happy that we get to this point, and it's been a lot of hard work. And just want to thank everyone that has supported the process so far. And I would be remiss to not say too that from this process we've received multiple recommendations from committees that advise this council, this body, and the function, administrative and legal function that we have to do this work. And you have my personal commitment and the commitment from the council to continue working on those things, which include specific types of analysis and ensuring that we're leading with race. And making sure that everyone in this region can thrive, and that our processes are working equitably in that. So, thanks for the opportunity to share some words, and excited to have to second the motion with Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You reminded us that this process has involved 2 years of what I'm sure some of the people in this room would describe as our blood, sweat, and tears to get us to today. I remain disappointed that in that 2 years, we have not taken advantage of all that time, all that energy, all that attention to meet some basic elements of urban growth management. We are supposed to, in fact, start by asking, do we need more land within the urban growth boundary, or is what we have within the boundary today sufficient to meet housing and employment needs? We started instead with asking for proposals, and one could look at the process then as fitting our answer to the first question into the proposals that we got. Affordable housing is, as we spent 2 hours now talking about, the most pressing real estate investment need in the region. And this concept plan acknowledges a little bit like we should think about affordable housing, but there's no commitment to affordable housing. In fact, the conditions that are proposed are really suggestions. There is nothing Metro has within its toolkit to make sure that as we move a regional asset of urban reserves into the UGB, that will in fact get satisfaction on the most pressing housing need that we face. And even on the job side, the concept plan proposes to add to the UGB land that sure would like to see developed for jobs, but we didn't really thoroughly enough examine the suitability of that land to meet whatever job development the region needs. It's not convenient to the kind of transportation that high-tech jobs like they're envisioning need. Substantial chunks of it are in small parcels, even though a lot of the discussion was about the market needs larger 50-acre plus lots. And at least two of the largest lots within the proposed employment area are hampered in ways that probably make it impossible for them to be developed. They're downstream from National Wildlife Refuge or River Refuge, and they're underneath power lines that make them not very attractive for someone who wants to develop high-tech fab or some other kind of operation. Had we identified a need and then gone looking for lands that met that need, we might very well, in fact, I'm pretty certain we would have come up with another place that more adequately meets regional needs. The transportation that I referred to, I understand more work will be done, but that's an infrastructure investment that we haven't evaluated what that cost is. Can a city of only 20,000 people now afford the infrastructure to serve that expansion area? Do they have the financeability? Do they have the credit worthiness to pull that off? Or do they come to regional resources that means infrastructure funds that are available to the region get diverted to this location instead of other areas that might be much more efficient or productive for housing and jobs. I've mentioned this many times before. We have policies in place that we talk about on this council as overarching values for this agency. And they are racial equity and climate stewardship. And yet, we didn't expect that the city of Sherwood, in making its proposal, would do the most basic homework of understanding what our policies are, and have said that because we didn't point out to them that we have this policy, we can't expect them to follow it. But we also, in our own right, missed the opportunity to say that our work within these walls is guided by those values, those policies. Our own process made it impossible for this council to give any authentic consideration or deliberation to alternative opportunities for expansion if there was a need. We put in place a process that we would invite proposals from cities and limit ourselves to consideration only of concept plans submitted by cities, making it impossible for us to look at alternatives. We never had a presentation about alternatives here. We never had deliberation. Alternatives were never on the agenda before this council. We never deliberated about it. We never considered it. That's a shortcoming that I think needs to be recovered. I went into this process 2 years ago, Madam Chair, hoping that we would move forward and be up to our responsibilities to the region to look for how we best direct resources, whether they're financial, financing, not just dollars, but financing, human resources, analysis, collaboration. And I anticipated at the beginning of this process that I'd be voting in favor of the ordinance that resulted from it. It will not surprise you that because I've mentioned these before and have not, and others have not joined, have ignored my cautions, I can't support this measure, and I wish we had done what I know we are all capable of doing and come up with a solution that is truly region centered.
Right, thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I want to reflect on the work that has been done. We have staff and community that have come forward throughout this process and been planful. And by planful, I mean thoughtful, I mean data informed, and I mean centered in community input. And the work that we do is to think on a 20-year time horizon in this. And a 20-year time horizon is half my life. I had to just Google when did the BlackBerry come out. That was 1999, so not quite a good benchmark about the Wayback Machine of 20 years ago, but pretty similar. So envisioning 20 years ahead with that reference to 20 years in the past is really, really hard. But to think through the work that we've done in laying a foundation and putting some bones out there, not only of how a local plan has come into place through the local city planning process, but through our ability to put our fingerprints a little bit on it with regional goals. Because when we are growing as a region, it is to the benefit of the region and not a hyper-local set of constituencies. To that end, I think it's really important to underscore that the housing needs analysis is state law. It does apply. We have a role in it, and it has a very particular pointiness when it comes to housing at all levels of affordability, and thinking through the assets that City of Sherwood already has, and thinking through the assets that we might imagine they are going to see bright, shining light on needing to focus on for their future growth. I do really appreciate staff having prepared all of our conditions of approval. Housing affordability, we've gotten a step further than we've ever gotten. I will keep a close eye on it. I do find it really important that it's not something that we write down on paper and let sail away. I think we need to have some updates on it and progress and choices that are made as the process continues at the city level. I also really want to lift up and celebrate the ability to include tribal consultation and resource protection, as well as our work on habitat as a valuable part of comprehensive planning for the city. So lots to monitor and hold as we think through what the region expects as conditions of approval here. We, as part of this process, had the opportunity to hear from a lot of demographers, and the panel we put together was virtual. It was part of the stakeholder table. We had some really esteemed folks who spent a lot of time talking about uncertainties. And I think we're at a really, really, really uncertain time now, potentially far more uncertain than we would have even broadcast or forecast 6 months, 7 months ago when that panel was in place. And I think in this time of uncertainty, we have to work at the speed of trust and relationship. And we've had some rocky moments at the staff level and the political level with the city of Sherwood. But I think we're standing today with the trust and with the willingness to move forward. Cities are key. As somebody who represents a lot of urban unincorporated, if we really want to live in this region, it is because cities are able to do their work, not because we have a whole bunch of density in unincorporated, underserved areas. So let's lean into it. Let's continue this partnership. I'll be a yes, but I'll be a yes who probably asks for more update reports than anybody really wants to put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President. I think for me, today is a milestone, and after today, I think the real work, the hard work, really begins. I just want to start with some appreciations. I want to thank all the folks that worked in our data and modeling. I really appreciated the staff recommendation and CEO recommendation. I want to thank our partners at MPAC for providing advice. But I was really, moved by community members that came to testify before us. We heard from teachers, we heard from restaurant owners, we heard from nurses, and I think one of my core beliefs is self-determination over your community where you live. So that was really impactful for me, and I'm thankful to the Sherwood leadership for taking to heart some of our conditions of approval. I'm really thankful that the city was able to list some properties to look at for affordable housing development. I would have liked them to be more set in stone, but I understand the business of affordable housing is difficult and unpredictable, especially of our current funding environment. So I do really want to follow up and commit to us continuing to play a role in the affordability piece. To me, that's absolutely critical to have housing that's available for folks that live in or work in the hospitality area or industrial jobs. Is like folks need to be able to live within reasonable distance on transit to be able to access those jobs. So that's really key for me going forward. And I join Councilor Lewis's intent to keep following up and be a partner. For next steps, again, the work is not done. I do really understand and support Councilor Nolan's comments about the process that we undertook. Most Metro councilors, when we're up here, we go through one cycle and maybe two. And for those of us that started on council just 2 years ago, everything was already in motion. So I've learned a lot. I think this council has learned a lot. And, I think I really want to uplift the goals and intent of the urban growth boundary system that was established in our state. I think it does contribute to our way of life and what makes this region a great place to live. But this is also a system that was created decades ago, I think in the 70s and 80s, and it wasn't done with the full consultation of tribal partners, communities of color, many different communities that were left out of that process. So my additional commitment is going forward, we will have some deeper conversations and really kind of lift up the comments that we also heard from CORE, our Community on Racial Equity, about what a 21st century land use system might be and look like. But that's going to require us to lift up our sleeves and do some of that hard work. And I do think it's time to have that deeper conversation. But like the container of this proposed Sherwood expansion wasn't in place to do that. I think it created a light on some of the conversations that we need to have, and I'm going to ask my fellow colleagues to join in on that process. I see some head nods. Thank you. But I think today is where we are. I think everyone did what was needed and required of them, knowing that this is an imperfect process. But I'm ready to proceed on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. I just want to reiterate, thank you to our staff. Our staff came to us early and iterated not just a process, but an openness to putting together the initial roundtable, something that we had never done before, of folks that would want to weigh in on how we make decisions, the black box of the data trying to get an understanding of that. I think that was a great start. And I think moving forward, as Councilor Wong had mentioned, we are scheduled to have conversations about lessons learned and how to move forward in the future. But we did give direction to staff, which they followed, in terms of how to structure this process. And it was based on the last 6 years ago, before any of us seated here were here. And we tried to improve upon that. And we will do that again with this conversations about lessons learned. So I just want to thank staff for, again, coming early, being open and responsive to the requests that have been made to keep our partners fully engaged and communicated with. I want to thank the City of Sherwood residents that participated in the process, because it was 2 years of engagement at the city, along with the commitment by the city council and the mayor to figure out the future vision of Sherwood as it grows. That is the point, I believe, of the Oregon Land Use Planning Program, is to have thoughtful, all-inclusive conversations about how a community is going to work and function and grow. So I just appreciate the use of this tool to actually get there and see the conversation moving forward with new zoning types that are going to be part of this conversation to be able to accommodate for all the different types of demographics, costs, affordability, as well as the future conversations yet to come in a city that is growing about what are the other tools that can be put on the table to get there. So I appreciate that beyond belief, because we all aren't starting at the same point in any one of our 24 cities. We're all in different points of urbanization and different issues. While we all face similar issues, the culture that is built up in every city, how it started, how it's growing, all of those affect the conversations on the ground. And so it is never the same conversation twice, but revolving around similar issues about livability and affordability. So again, I appreciate all of that. I also appreciate this follow-up conversation, and that is a result of the in-depth work that counselors here did and our staff did in order to make sure that we were doing an all-inclusive approach, and we continue to strive for a more inclusive approach. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm extremely excited to be able to provide a resolution to the future council on how we think the next urban growth management conversation should go, so that there is a building of knowledge for not only us, but staff and expectations in the region, so we can start to build on that. It is not lost on me that this council is extremely deliberative and thoughtful and has put a lot of time and energy into not just understanding the issues of all the stakeholders, but also of being problem solution oriented. So I thank you all for that and for all of the work. And with that, Georgia, seeing no other hands raised, will you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Counselor Simpson.
Aye.
Counselor Lewis.
Aye.
Counselor Wong.
Yes.
Counselor Rosenthal.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Enthusiastic, yes.
Counselor Nolan.
No.
Council President Peterson.
Aye, the motion passes. Thank you. And again, thank you to everybody who participated in this process. And we look forward to the continued work with the city of Sherwood to make sure that we are growing this region in a way that increases livability and affordability. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Chief Operating Officer Communication. Marisa, take it away.
Thank you, Council President Peterson. I just wanted to thank Council for the productive budget work session and forecast discussion yesterday. You may have seen that yesterday I sent an all-staff email just informing our metro community about the forecast and some of the difficulties and challenges that we're facing. Just want to acknowledge that and thank our staff in advance for their patience and continuing to do good work.
as we navigate the next few months and figure out how to address some of the areas where we have deficits. So thank you again, and I look forward to further conversation.
Thank you, and thank you for the conversation. Counselor Communication. Everybody looks a little tired and ready for a break. All right, with that, I can tell, virtually I can tell. Thank you everyone for a great council meeting today, and again, for all of the work of moving the region forward. Some big issues, our two largest issues continually on the same day, as Councilor Wong noted. With that, thank you, council. We are adjourned. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is Tuesday, December 10th at 10:30 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you.